I was staring at a letter demanding $23,000 when I realized my entire life in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, was about to implode. The letter came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, delivered by certified mail to my modest three-bedroom house in Saguaro Heights, a planned community that sprawled across the desert landscape like a beige monument to middle-class aspiration. I had lived here for 8 years, paid every HOA fee on time, kept my lawn maintained despite the brutal summer heat, and generally stayed out of everyone's way. I worked as a software developer for a tech company downtown, spent my weekends hiking in the Superstition Mountains, and thought I had built a quiet, stable life after my divorce 3 years ago. The letterhead read, Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association, in an obnoxiously ornate font. Below it, the HOA president Linda Carmichael's name was printed in bold letters along with the secretary's name, Patricia Henderson. I knew Patricia, or at least I thought I did. She lived 4 streets over in one of the larger homes, always seemed pleasant enough at community meetings, and ran the HOA office with what appeared to be ruthless efficiency. The letter stated that I had agreed to pay for emergency repairs to the community pool facility after allegedly causing significant damage during an after-hours incident in July. According to the document, I had signed a liability agreement accepting full financial responsibility. The repairs, which included resurfacing the pool, replacing damaged filtration equipment, and fixing what they claimed was vandalism to the pool house, totaled $23,412. I read the letter 3 times, my coffee growing cold on the kitchen counter. July. I tried to remember anything unusual about July. I had been in Seattle for most of that month, attending a tech conference, and then taking a week of vacation to visit my brother. I had barely used the community pool all summer. I certainly had never damaged it, and I absolutely had never signed any liability agreement. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. The phone rang 6 times before Patricia answered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Saguaro Heights HOA, this is Patricia speaking. Patricia, this is Marcus Webb from 2247 Desert Rose Lane. I just received a letter about pool damage and a $23,000 bill. There has to be some mistake. There was a pause and I could hear papers rustling. Oh, Marcus, yes. No mistake, I'm afraid. We have your signed agreement right here in our files. You accepted responsibility for the damage that occurred on July 15th. That's impossible. I was in Seattle on July 15th. I have flight records, hotel receipts, everything. I wasn't even in Arizona. Her tone shifted, becoming clipped and professional. Well, we have a notarized document with your signature. If you have concerns, you'll need to submit them in writing and attend the next board meeting. But I should warn you, the payment is due by October 15th, which is 2 weeks from now. If payment isn't received, we'll be forced to place a lien on your property. A lien? For something I didn't do, let me see this supposed agreement. You can request copies of all documents by submitting a formal request form, which is available on our website. There's a $15 processing fee per document. I felt my jaw clench. I want to see that document today, Patricia. This is fraud. Mr. Webb, I don't appreciate accusations. Everything has been handled according to HOA bylaws and Arizona state law. Good day. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone, feeling like I had just been pushed off a cliff. $23,000, a lien on my property, a signature I never made. My mind raced through the implications. A lien would destroy my credit, potentially force me to sell my house, derail the financial stability I had worked so hard to rebuild after the divorce. I immediately drove to the HOA office, a small building near the community center that always smelled like cheap air freshener and desperation. Patricia was behind the front desk, typing on her computer with aggressive precision. She was exactly what you would picture when someone said, HOA secretary. Mid-50s, helmet of blonde highlights, oversized glasses on a chain, and an expression that suggested she found most of humanity disappointing. "I need to see that agreement," I said, keeping my voice level despite the fury building in my chest. She looked up with practiced annoyance. "As I said on the phone, you need to submit a formal request." "Patricia, you're accusing me of something I didn't do and demanding more money than most people make in 6 months. I'm not leaving until I see that document." She sighed dramatically, as if I was the unreasonable one, and pulled a file from a cabinet behind her desk. She placed it on the counter and opened it to reveal a 2-page document. I immediately recognized the HOA letterhead, and there, at the bottom of the second page, was what appeared to be my signature, except it wasn't. I had signed thousands of documents in my life. I knew my signature like I knew my own face. This was close. Someone had clearly practiced it, but it was wrong. The loop in my M was too tight, the tail on my B too short, and the overall flow was stilted, careful in a way my actual signature never was after years of hurried document signing. "This isn't my signature," I said, pointing at the document. Patricia smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "It's notarized, Mr. Webb. See the notary seal right there, official and legal." I looked at the notary information. The notary public's name was listed as Jennifer Kowalski, with a commission number and an official-looking seal embossed on the paper. The date was July 15th, 10 in the morning. "I want a copy of this entire document, right now." "That will be $15. I pulled out my wallet and slapped a 20 on the counter. She made change with infuriating slowness, then walked to a copy machine and produced duplicates of both pages. I took them and walked out, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. Back in my car, I sat in the parking lot and examined the copies more carefully. The agreement stated that I, Marcus Webb, acknowledged causing damage to the community pool facility through negligence and reckless behavior, and agreed to pay for all repairs. It was vague about what exactly I had done, using phrases like incident resulting in substantial property damage without specifics. The notary section looked official, but something about it felt wrong. I drove home and immediately got to work. First, I pulled up my records from July. Credit card statements showed charges in Seattle starting July 10th through July 22nd. I had stayed at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, eaten at Pike Place Market restaurants, attended conference sessions at the Washington State Convention Center. My flight records confirmed I had flown out on July 9th and returned on July 23rd. There was no possible way I could have been in Phoenix on July 15th to sign any document, but that notary seal bothered me. In Arizona, notaries are commissioned by the Secretary of State and are required to keep detailed records of every document they notarize. Those records, called notary journals, are legal documents that must include the date, time, type of document, identification presented by the signer, and the signer's signature. If this Jennifer Kowalski had actually notarized a document with my signature on July 15th, and I could prove I wasn't there, that was more than just HOA drama. That was fraud. That was a crime. I spent the next hour researching Arizona notary law. According to Arizona Revised Statutes Title 41, Chapter 2, Article 2, a notary public who knowingly notarizes a false document can face criminal charges including forgery and fraud. The penalties ranged from fines to actual prison time, depending on the circumstances. More importantly, notary journals are public records. I had a right to inspect them. I called the Arizona Secretary of State's office and navigated through their phone tree until I reached someone in the notary division. A tired-sounding woman named Carol answered and listened to my situation. "So you want to verify a notarization?" she asked. "Yes, and I want to see the notary's journal entry for that specific transaction." "You have the right to request that. You'll need to contact the notary directly and ask to inspect their journal. They're required by law to show it to you, though they can charge a reasonable fee for copies." What if they refuse? Then you can file a complaint with our office. We investigate all complaints of notary misconduct. If there's evidence of fraud, we can revoke their commission and refer the matter to law enforcement. I thanked her and hung up, feeling the first glimmer of hope since this nightmare started. I looked up Jennifer Kowalski online and found several notaries with that name in the Phoenix area. I started calling them one by one. The first Jennifer Kowalski was a mortgage notary who had never heard of Sagaro Heights HOA. The second worked exclusively for a title company. The third didn't answer, so I left a message. I expanded my search and found a Jennifer Kowalski who listed herself as a mobile notary serving the greater Phoenix area. Her website showed her smiling in professional attire, offering services for real estate closings, powers of attorney, and general notarizations. I called the number on her website. She answered on the second ring. Jennifer Kowalski, Mobile Notary Services. Hi, Jennifer. My name is Marcus Webb, and I need to verify a notarization you allegedly performed on July 15th of this year. There was a pause. July 15th. What kind of document? An HOA liability agreement for Sagaro Heights. According to the document, you notarized my signature at 10 in the morning. Another pause, longer this time. I don't recall that specific appointment. Can you give me more details? I need to see your notary journal entry for that date and time. According to Arizona law, I have the right to inspect it. Her voice became cautious. You certainly do. I keep meticulous records. I'm actually looking at my July journal right now. Hold on. I heard pages turning. July 15th, 10 in the morning. I have an entry here, but it's not for Sagaro Heights HOA. I notarized a power of attorney at a private residence in Scottsdale. The client's name was Margaret Torres. My heart started racing. Nothing about Marcus Webb or any HOA documents? No, nothing. I only did 3 notarizations that entire day, and none of them match what you're describing. Mr. Webb, are you saying someone used my notary seal fraudulently? That's exactly what I'm saying. Can I come see your journal in person? I need to document this. Absolutely. This is serious. If someone is forging notarizations with my seal, I need to know about it immediately. I'm at home in Temp right now. Can you come this afternoon? I assured her I could and got her address. Before I left, I made 2 more calls. The first was to a lawyer, John Patterson, whom a friend had recommended years ago. His secretary said he could see me the next morning at 9. The second call was to my best friend Derek, who worked as an investigator for an insurance company and knew how to document evidence. You need photos, timestamps, everything, Derek said when I explained the situation. If this notary confirms her journal doesn't match that document, you've got proof of forgery, but you need to document it properly or it won't hold up. Can you come with me? I trust you to do this right. I'll meet you there in an hour. Jennifer Kowalski lived in a tidy townhouse in Temp, about 20 minutes from my place. Derek arrived right after me, carrying a professional camera and a small evidence kit that made him look like he was about to investigate a murder. Jennifer met us at the door, looking genuinely distressed. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and worry lines creasing her forehead. This is incredibly serious, she said as she led us to her home office. I've been a notary for 6 years and never had anything like this happen. My reputation is everything in this business. Her office was organized to the point of obsession, with color-coded filing systems and a locked cabinet specifically for notary supplies. She pulled out a bound journal with numbered pages and opened it to July 15th. Here's my entry for 10 in the morning. Margaret Torres, power of attorney, notarized at her home in Scottsdale. She presented an Arizona driver's license for identification. Here's her signature in my journal. As you can see, there's no entry for any Marcus Webb or any HOA document. Derek photographed the journal page, getting close-ups of the entries before and after the 10 o'clock appointment. He documented the page numbers, showing they were sequential with no signs of pages being removed or altered. Can you show me your notary seal? I asked. Jennifer pulled out a heavy embosser from a locked drawer. This is my only seal. I keep it locked up always, exactly as required by law. The serial number on the seal matches my commission number exactly. Derek photographed the seal and its serial number, then compared it to the copy of the forged document I had brought. He pulled out a magnifying glass and examined both closely. The seal impression looks similar, but it's not identical, he said. See how the text curves slightly different. And the depth of the embossing is inconsistent. This looks like someone made a copy of a legitimate seal, probably from another document, and created a fake stamp or embosser. Jennifer looked like she might be sick. Someone copied my seal. How is that even possible? If they had access to a document you previously notarized, they could scan the seal impression and create a fake one using rubber stamp technology or even 3D printing, Derek explained. It happens more often than you'd think. Have you ever done any notarizations for Sagaro Heights HOA or anyone connected to them? I asked. Jennifer thought for a moment, then started flipping through her journals. The name sounds familiar. Let me check. She went back several months, running her finger down entries. Here. June 3rd, I notarized a contract for Patricia Henderson at the Sagaro Heights HOA office. Real estate lease agreement for the community center space. My blood went cold. Patricia Henderson, the HOA secretary. She had access to a document with Jennifer's real notary seal. She could have easily scanned it, created a fake seal, and used it to notarize forged documents. I need copies of this journal page and your commission certificate, I said. And Jennifer, I think you should report this to the Secretary of State immediately. If Patricia Henderson is forging notarizations, yours might not be the only one. Jennifer's hands were shaking as she made copies. I'll call them right now. And Mr. Webb, I'll testify to anything you need. This is forgery and I won't have my name attached to fraud. Derek and I left with a folder full of documentation. Photos of the journal entries, copies of Jennifer's commission certificate, close-up images of her real seal compared to the forged one, and a signed statement from Jennifer describing the timeline and her records. We sat in my car in her driveway, reviewing everything. You've got her dead to rights, Derek said. This is felony forgery, probably felony fraud, and if she filed that fake document as a legal HOA record, that's additional charges. But you need a good lawyer before you go any further. I have an appointment tomorrow morning. What do I do about the payment deadline? They want the money in less than 2 weeks. Don't pay a dime, and document every interaction you have with the HOA from now on. Record phone calls if Arizona allows it, keep emails, everything. These people are trying to steal $23,000 from you using forged documents. This isn't going to end with a polite conversation. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed reviewing everything, trying to understand why Patricia Henderson would forge my signature. What did she gain from this? Was she stealing from other homeowners too? The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. The pool damage might not even be real. The entire thing could be fabricated to extort money from me, but why me specifically? The next morning, I arrived at John Patterson's law office in downtown Phoenix at 8:45, clutching my folder of evidence like it was a life preserver. Patterson's office was in a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He was a tall man in his late 50s with gray hair, and the kind of calm demeanor that probably came from decades of dealing with people's worst problems. I laid everything out for him. The demand letter, the forged agreement, my alibi showing I was in Seattle, Jennifer Kowalski's journal proving the notarization was fake, the comparison photos of the real and forged seals. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Mr. Webb, what you have here is a clear case of forgery and fraud. The question is how you want to proceed. You have several options. I want to clear my name and make sure Patricia Henderson can't do this to anyone else. Commendable, but that's going to require multiple steps. First, We need to respond to the HOA's demand and formally dispute this entire claim. I'll draft a letter to the board explaining that the signature is forged, providing your alibi, and demanding they withdraw the payment demand immediately. Second, we need to report this to the police. This is criminal conduct and it should be investigated as such. Third, we may want to sue the HOA and Patricia Henderson personally for attempted fraud and damages. What about the payment deadline? Ignore it. They can't enforce a forged contract. If they try to place a lien on your property, we'll immediately file to have it removed and we'll sue them for abuse of process. But frankly, once they realize you have proof the signature is forged, I suspect they'll back down quickly. Unless Patricia convinces them I'm lying. That's why we need to get ahead of this. I want to send this letter today and I want you to file a police report this afternoon. Don't wait. The longer this sits, the more time they have to cover their tracks or destroy evidence. Patterson drafted a 5-page letter that was simultaneously professional and devastating. It detailed every piece of evidence proving the signature was forged, included copies of my Seattle travel records and Jennifer Kowalski's notary journal, and demanded the immediate withdrawal of all claims against me. It also put the HOA on notice that any further attempt to collect the fraudulent debt would result in legal action and criminal complaints. I'm sending this via certified mail and email to every board member, Patterson said. I want them all to know what Patricia Henderson has done. Often in these situations, the other board members have no idea fraud is happening. They trust their secretary to handle paperwork, and that trust gets abused. I left his office and drove directly to the Phoenix Police Department's non-emergency reporting center. The officer at the desk looked bored until I explained I was reporting forgery and fraud. Then he perked up and called over a detective named Sarah Morrison, who specialized in financial crimes. Detective Morrison was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. She took my statement in an interview room, recording everything. I showed her all my evidence, walking through the timeline step by step. This is pretty clear-cut, she said when I finished. Forged signature, fake notarization, fraudulent demand for money. That's forgery in the first degree under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 132002. Fraud schemes under 132310, and possibly theft by extortion. If we can prove Patricia Henderson created this document and used it to try to obtain money from you, she's looking at multiple felony charges. How long does an investigation like this take? Depends on what we find. I'll need to interview Patricia Henderson, examine the HOA's records, talk to the notary Jennifer Kowalski, and probably interview other board members. If this is an isolated incident, we might wrap it up in a few weeks. If it's part of a larger pattern, it could take months. But I'll start immediately. This kind of fraud in HOA disputes is more common than people realize, and we take it seriously. I gave her copies of all my documentation and left with a case number and Detective Morrison's direct contact information. I felt like I was finally fighting back, but I also felt exposed. Patricia Henderson was going to find out about the police investigation, about the lawyer's letter, about everything. She would know I wasn't backing down, and I had no idea how she would react. I found out the next day. I was working from home, trying to focus on debugging code for a client project when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia Henderson standing on my porch with Linda Carmichael, the HOA president. Linda was a brittle-looking woman in her 60s who always dressed like she was attending a country club luncheon. Both of them looked furious. "We need to talk," Linda said without preamble. "My lawyer has advised me not to discuss this matter directly with the HOA," I said, which was absolutely true. Patterson had been very clear about this. "Your lawyer sent us a very insulting letter making outrageous accusations," Patricia said, her voice shaking with what appeared to be righteous anger. "You're claiming I forged documents. Do you have any idea how serious that accusation is?" About as serious as actually forging documents, I said. And I have proof. The notary whose seal appears on that agreement has confirmed she never notarized any document for me. Her journal proves it. So either you forged my signature and used a fake notary seal, or someone else in the HOA office did. Either way, that agreement is fraudulent. Linda held up a hand. Marcus, let's all calm down. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. If you didn't sign the agreement, maybe there was confusion about who was responsible for the pool damage. There was no confusion. That's my signature on the document, or at least an attempted copy of it. Someone forged it, and I was in Seattle when it was supposedly notarized. I have credit card records, flight records, hotel records. It's impossible for me to have signed it. Patricia's face had gone pale. The notary must be mistaken about her records. She's not. I've seen her journal. She notarized a completely different document that day at a different location. And I've filed a police report. Detective Sarah Morrison is investigating this as forgery and fraud. You called the police. Linda's voice was sharp with disbelief. Over an HOA dispute. This isn't a dispute. This is a crime. Someone forged my signature to try to steal $23,000 from me. That's not a disagreement about paint colors or lawn maintenance. That's felony fraud. Patricia took a step forward, and her expression had shifted from anger to something that looked almost like panic. You're making a huge mistake. The HOA board approved this agreement. We have procedures. You're going to regret causing all this trouble. Is that a threat? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. It's a warning, Patricia said. You're accusing respected members of this community of crimes. There will be consequences. Get off my property, I said. All future communication goes through my lawyer. I closed the door in their faces and immediately called Patterson to report the confrontation. He listened and made notes. That's witness intimidation, he said. Or at least attempted intimidation. Patricia Henderson is panicking, which means she knows she's caught. I'm going to call Detective Morrison and let her know about this conversation. And Marcus, be careful. People who commit fraud sometimes do desperate things when they're cornered. The next week was tense. I installed security cameras around my house after finding one of my car tires slashed in my driveway. I couldn't prove it was related to the HOA situation, but the timing was suspicious. Detective Morrison came to my house to interview me again, asking for more details about my interactions with Patricia and the HOA board. We've executed a search warrant on the HOA office, she told me. We seized their computer systems, filing cabinets, financial records, everything. And what we're finding is very interesting. How so? You're not the only one. We've found at least 3 other instances where homeowners were billed for damages or special assessments with questionable documentation. In 2 cases, there are agreements with signatures that look suspicious. We're tracking down those homeowners now to verify. My stomach dropped. This is bigger than just me. It appears so. Patricia Henderson has been the HOA secretary for 7 years. We're going through every financial record from her entire tenure. If she's been systematically defrauding homeowners, we need to know the full extent. What about the pool damage? Was that even real? Detective Morrison smiled grimly. That's the interesting part. We talked to the pool repair company listed on the invoices. They did do work on the community pool in July, but it was routine maintenance, not emergency repairs. The total cost was $4,000, paid by the HOA's insurance company. There was never any damage requiring $23,000 in repairs. So the entire thing was fabricated. Looks that way. Patricia created fake invoices, forged your signature on a liability agreement, and was attempting to pocket the money. We're examining the HOA's financial accounts to see where funds have been going. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation expanded rapidly. Detective Morrison discovered that Patricia had created a separate bank account in the HOA's name that wasn't reported to the board. Money from fraudulent charges had been deposited into this account, and then transferred to Patricia's personal accounts. The total amount appeared to be over $100,000 stolen across multiple years. 4 other homeowners came forward after being contacted by police. All had similar stories: unexpected bills for damages they didn't cause, agreements they never signed, threats of liens and legal action if they didn't pay. 2 had actually paid rather than fight the HOA, losing thousands of dollars to Patricia's scheme. The case exploded into local news. Phoenix television stations ran stories about HOA fraud, interviewing homeowners and legal experts. Our community was suddenly famous for all the wrong reasons. Board members who had trusted Patricia were horrified to discover what had been happening under their watch. Linda Carmichael resigned as president, claiming she had no knowledge of the fraud, but accepting responsibility for failing to provide proper oversight. On October 20th, Detective Morrison called me with news. "We're making arrests today. Patricia Henderson is being charged with multiple counts of forgery, fraud, theft, and money laundering. We've also charged her husband, Robert Henderson, as an accomplice. Turns out he helped her set up the fake bank accounts and launder the money. What happens now?" "They'll be arraigned, probably make bail, and then we go through the court process. Given the amount of money involved and the number of victims, the prosecutor is taking this very seriously. They're looking at significant prison time if convicted." I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The nightmare was ending, but it had consumed weeks of my life and cost thousands in legal fees. Patterson assured me I could sue to recover those costs, along with damages for the emotional distress and the time I had spent fighting the fraud. The arraignment was held in Maricopa County Superior Court on a cold morning in early November. I attended with Derek, sitting in the back of the courtroom as Patricia and Robert Henderson were brought before the judge. Patricia looked nothing like the confident, officious secretary I had dealt with. She was pale and drawn, her expensive HOA meeting clothes replaced with a simple dress that looked like it had been grabbed in a hurry. The prosecutor read the charges: 8 counts of forgery, 12 counts of fraud, 4 counts of theft, and 2 counts of money laundering. The dollar amounts made people in the courtroom gasp. Patricia had allegedly stolen $147,000 over 6 years from various homeowners, using forged documents and fake charges. The judge set bail at $50,000 each for Patricia and Robert. Their lawyer, a harried-looking public defender, argued for lower bail, claiming they weren't flight risks. The prosecutor countered by noting they had already attempted to move money to offshore accounts, suggesting consciousness of guilt and potential flight risk. The judge sided with the prosecutor. As Patricia was led out of the courtroom, she looked directly at me. There was no anger in her expression anymore, just a hollow kind of defeat. I felt no satisfaction in seeing her like that, just a tired sense that justice was slowly grinding forward. The HOA held an emergency meeting the following week to address the crisis. A new board was elected, including several homeowners who had been victims of Patricia's fraud. They hired a forensic accountant to review every transaction from the past 7 years and identify all victims. I was asked to join the board, but I declined. I had no desire to spend my evenings dealing with HOA politics after everything that had happened. The new board did make several important changes. They implemented new financial controls requiring multiple signatures on all expenditures over $1,000, mandatory annual audits by an independent accounting firm, and a policy requiring all homeowner agreements to be signed in person at board meetings with multiple witnesses. They also voted to reimburse all verified victims of Patricia's fraud from the HOA's reserve funds, which provided some immediate relief while the criminal case proceeded. Patterson filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia and Robert Henderson in December, seeking to recover my legal fees, the value of my time spent fighting the fraud, damages for emotional distress, and punitive damages. We also named the HOA as a defendant, arguing they had failed in their fiduciary duty to provide oversight and prevent fraud. The HOA's insurance company ended up settling with me for $15,000 to avoid protracted litigation. The case against the Hendersons would take longer, but Patterson was confident we would eventually collect once their assets were seized. The criminal trial began in March, almost 6 months after I first received that certified letter demanding $23,000. I was called as a witness on the second day. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Reeves, walked me through my entire experience. Receiving the demand letter, discovering the forged signature, tracking down Jennifer Kowalski and examining her notary journal, filing the police report, and documenting everything with help from Derek. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that the signature might have been legitimate, that I might have forgotten signing it, that notary records could be mistaken. But when Jennifer Kowalski testified and brought her sealed, bound notary journal with sequential page numbers, and no entry matching the forged document, that defense crumbled. When Derek testified about the differences between the real and forged notary seals, complete with enlarged photographs showing the discrepancies, it crumbled further. The prosecution presented evidence of Patricia's separate bank account, the forged invoices from the pool company, and testimony from other victims who described nearly identical schemes. They showed email exchanges between Patricia and her husband discussing how to hide the money and avoid detection. One email, read aloud in court, had Robert writing to Patricia, "If anyone questions the web charge, just show them the agreement. They won't know you signed it." That email was devastating. It proved knowledge and intent beyond any reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts for Patricia Henderson. Guilty on all accessory and money laundering counts for Robert Henderson. When the verdicts were read, Patricia dropped her head into her hands and began crying. Robert sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. During that time, I tried to return to normal life. I worked, I hiked, I spent time with friends. But the experience had changed something fundamental about how I viewed the systems and institutions I had always taken for granted. An HOA is supposed to maintain property values and community standards, not serve as a vehicle for theft. A notary seal is supposed to ensure authenticity, not provide a tool for forgery. I had learned that any system built on trust could be exploited by people willing to abuse that trust. The sentencing hearing brought closure, though it was bittersweet. Patricia Henderson was sentenced to 8 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections, with eligibility for release after serving 85% of the sentence. Robert received 4 years for his role as an accomplice. Judge Rachel Thompson, who presided over the case, delivered a stern lecture before announcing the sentences. "You betrayed your community's trust," she told Patricia. "You exploited your position of authority to steal from your neighbors. You forged documents, created false records, and attempted to destroy people's financial security for personal gain. This court takes such betrayals very seriously. The sentence reflects not just the monetary harm you caused, but the damage to community trust and the vulnerability of your victims." Restitution was ordered in the full amount stolen, $147,000, plus interest and legal fees for all victims. The court ordered seizure of the Hendersons' house, cars, and all financial accounts to begin paying restitution. It would take years for victims to be fully repaid, but at least the process was beginning. After the sentencing, several of the other victims and I went to a coffee shop near the courthouse. We sat around a large table, people who had been strangers 6 months ago but were now connected by a shared experience of fraud and justice. We talked about what we had learned, how we could help prevent this from happening in other communities, and how strangely difficult it was to feel satisfaction even when the legal system worked. "I'm glad she's going to prison," said Martin, a retired teacher who had paid Patricia $8,000 for fake landscaping repairs. But I'm also angry at myself for not questioning things sooner. I just trusted the HOA to be legitimate. That's what she counted on, said Rebecca, a single mother who had nearly lost her house to a fraudulent lien. She knew people trust official-looking documents and don't have time to fight. She exploited that. The system only worked because Marcus fought, added James, an accountant who had been one of Patricia's earliest victims. If he had just paid the money or accepted the lien, she would still be doing this. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who had been pushed to the edge and fought back out of desperation and stubbornness. But maybe that was enough. Maybe that was how most fraud gets exposed. Not through dramatic investigations, but through ordinary people refusing to accept injustice and pushing until someone listens. Life in Seguero Heights slowly returned to normal over the following months. The new HOA board operated with transparency and caution, eager to rebuild trust. Property values, which had briefly dropped when the fraud became public, recovered as news outlets moved on to other stories. The community pool, which had never actually needed $23,000 in repairs, continued to serve families on hot Arizona afternoons. I stayed in my house, though I had briefly considered selling and moving somewhere without an HOA. But running away felt wrong. This was my home, my community, and Patricia Henderson's crimes didn't change that. Instead, I became more involved, attending board meetings occasionally and staying informed about financial decisions. I encouraged transparency and asked questions when something seemed off. Other homeowners did the same, creating a culture of healthy skepticism that probably should have existed all along. Jennifer Kowalski, the notary whose seal had been forged, sent me a thank you card several months after the trial. She wrote that my case had led to stronger notary regulations in Arizona, including requirements for more detailed record-keeping and harsher penalties for notary fraud. She had testified before a state legislative committee about the vulnerabilities in the system and the need for reform. Something good had come from the nightmare, even if it was small. Derek and I continued our tradition of weekend hikes in the Superstition Mountains. On one particularly beautiful morning in late spring, we stood at the summit of Flatiron Peak, looking out over the sprawling Phoenix metropolitan area, our community somewhere in that vast landscape of tile roofs and swimming pools. You know what still gets me? I said, watching a hawk circle on thermal currents below us. She could have just embezzled money directly, made up fake expenses, paid fake vendors. Instead, she targeted individuals and forged documents to make it look like we owed the money. That's so much more complicated and risky. Narcissism, Derek said. People like Patricia don't just want money. They want to feel smart, to manipulate people, to prove they're cleverer than everyone else. Forging signatures and creating fake notarizations probably gave her a thrill. She was playing a game, and the game was almost more important than the money. Well, she lost the game. Because you didn't give up. Most people would have paid or accepted the lien and moved on. You fought back. I thought about that as we started our descent. I hadn't felt brave at the time, just angry and frightened and determined not to be robbed. But maybe that was what courage looked like in real life. Not fearlessness, but pushing forward despite fear because the alternative was unacceptable. The civil lawsuit was resolved in July, almost a year after I received that first demand letter. The Hendersons' assets had been liquidated, and victims received partial restitution. I recovered my legal fees and received an additional $20,000 in damages. It didn't make up for the stress and time I had lost, but it helped. More importantly, it represented acknowledgement that what had happened was wrong and that the system, eventually, had responded. I used some of the settlement money to upgrade my home office, buying a better desk and a professional-grade coffee maker. I also donated $5,000 to the Arizona Attorney General's office's Fraud Victim Assistance Program, hoping it might help someone else fighting a similar battle. On the 1-year anniversary of receiving that certified letter, I was working in my backyard, replacing some weathered fence boards when my neighbor Carol walked over. She was an older woman who had lived in Saguaro Heights since the community was first built. "Marcus, I never properly thanked you," she said. "For standing up to Patricia. I knew something was wrong with the HOA finances for years, but I didn't have proof and I didn't know how to fight it. You saved this community." "I just saved myself," I said. "Everything else was a side effect." "That's usually how it works," she replied with a knowing smile. "One person says enough, and it creates space for others to speak up. You gave people permission to question authority and demand accountability. That's more valuable than you probably realize." After she left, I stood in my yard, hammer in hand, and looked around at my modest house with its small yard and desert landscaping. I had nearly lost this place to a forged signature and a woman's greed, but I hadn't. I had fought and won, not through any particular heroism, but through stubbornness, documentation, and faith that evidence would eventually matter more than authority. The fence board fit perfectly into place, secured with new nails that would hold for years. I stepped back and examined my work, satisfied with the result. Small repairs, done properly, could extend the life of something worth preserving. Maybe that was true for communities too. Patricia Henderson would spend the next several years in prison, her reputation destroyed, her freedom taken, all because she thought she could forge a signature and get away with it. She had underestimated one crucial thing: people keep records. I kept credit card statements and flight confirmations. Jennifer Kowalski kept detailed notary journals. Detective Morrison knew how to follow financial trails. In the end, the truth was buried under all those records, waiting to be uncovered by someone willing to dig. I went back inside, washed my hands, and returned to my computer to finish debugging code for a client. Life moved forward, as it always does, carrying the lessons of the past into an uncertain future. I was more cautious now, more aware of how systems could be exploited, but also more confident that fighting back was possible when armed with truth and evidence. That evening, I received an email from Amanda Reeves, the prosecutor who had handled Patricia's case. She was writing to let me know that the case had been featured in a training program for law enforcement on investigating HOA fraud. My willingness to come forward and provide documentation had created a template for how victims could effectively build cases against fraudulent HOA officials. "Your case likely prevented dozens of similar frauds in other communities," she wrote. "When people know that victims will fight back and that evidence can destroy even the most official-looking documents, they're less likely to attempt these schemes. Thank you for your courage and persistence." I read the email twice, feeling a complicated mix of pride and lingering anger that any of this had been necessary. But Carol and Amanda were right. Standing up to Patricia had mattered beyond just my own situation. It had created accountability, exposed systemic weaknesses, and hopefully made other would-be fraudsters think twice before targeting their communities. The sun was setting over the Sonoran Desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded me why I had chosen to live here in the first place. Arizona could be harsh and unforgiving, but it was also beautiful and honest in its harshness. There was something appropriate about fighting a fraud case in a landscape that hid nothing, where everything was exposed under relentless sunshine. I walked out to my front porch and sat in the chair I had positioned to catch the evening breeze. My street was quiet, families inside eating dinner or watching television, the ordinary rhythms of suburban life continuing uninterrupted. No one driving past my house would know that 12 months ago, I had been on the edge of financial disaster, targeted by someone who was supposed to serve the community. But I knew. And I knew what I was capable of when pushed to defend myself. Persistence, attention to detail, willingness to challenge authority, and faith that documentation would triumph over deception. Those weren't dramatic qualities, but they had been enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Beer and pizza this weekend. You're buying since you're rich from the settlement." I smiled and typed back, "Deal, but you're getting cheap beer after all those investigator fees I paid you. I gave you the friend discount." That was the friend discount. "I'm terrified to see your regular rates." The exchange was normal and comfortable, a reminder that life had returned to baseline after months of stress. The HOA drama had become a story I would tell at parties, a cautionary tale about vigilance and documentation, but it was no longer the center of my existence. Over the next few months, I received occasional updates about Patricia's situation. She was housed at the Perryville prison complex west of Phoenix, serving her sentence and apparently working in the prison library. Robert had been sent to a different facility and was reportedly teaching GED classes to other inmates. Their house had been sold to help pay restitution, and the proceeds were being distributed among victims according to a court-approved formula. The Saguaro Heights HOA thrived under new leadership, implementing reforms that made financial transparency mandatory and creating multiple checks and balances to prevent any single person from having too much control. Annual meetings became better attended as homeowners realized the importance of oversight. The community that Patricia had exploited and betrayed became stronger because of her crimes, which felt like a fitting outcome. In December, 18 months after the nightmare began, I attended the HOA's holiday party at the community center. It was a surprisingly pleasant evening, with neighbors I had never spoken to coming up to thank me for exposing the fraud. Some shared their own stories of feeling intimidated by Patricia or uncertain about charges they had received but paid anyway out of fear. "You gave us all a voice," said Michael, a young father who lived 3 streets over. "Before your case, I thought you just had to accept whatever the HOA said. Now I know we can question things and demand proof. That's a huge shift." As the party wound down, I stood near the community pool, the same pool that had been the centerpiece of Patricia's attempted fraud. It looked peaceful in the evening light, the water still and reflective. In summer, it would be filled with children and families, serving its intended purpose, no longer a prop in a criminal scheme. I thought about that first certified letter, the shock and fear I had felt reading the demand for $23,000. I thought about the hours spent gathering evidence, the stress of police interviews and court appearances, the exhaustion of fighting an institution that was supposed to serve me. And I thought about Patricia Henderson in her prison cell, her freedom and reputation sacrificed for money she never even got to keep. She had promised justice in her own twisted way. She had created official-looking documents, forged signatures with care, and built a facade of legitimacy around her thefts. But real justice had come from something simpler: notary records that proved the fraud, credit card statements that provided an alibi, and a stubborn refusal to accept lies as truth. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of desert flowers and chlorine from the pool. I finished my drink and walked back to my house, past the homes of neighbors who were no longer strangers, through a community that had been tested and survived. My fence still needed more work, my lawn could use some attention, and I had a backlog of client projects waiting for Monday morning. Life was full of small demands and ordinary responsibilities, and I was grateful for all of them. Because ordinary was what Patricia had tried to steal from me. The security of my home, the stability of my finances, the peace of mind that comes from knowing you're not being cheated. She had failed, stopped by something as mundane as a notary's journal and as powerful as documented truth. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, home and safe and vindicated. The legal battle was over, the criminal convicted, the community reformed. Justice had been slow and exhausting, but it had arrived. And that, I decided as I settled in for the evening, was enough. The story of Patricia Henderson's fraud would fade from community memory eventually, becoming one of those cautionary tales that gets abbreviated and simplified over time. But for those of us who lived through it, the lessons would remain vivid. Trust but verify, document everything, question authority when something feels wrong, and never underestimate the power of evidence properly preserved. My notary records had proved the fraud. Those simple journal entries, maintained by a diligent notary public following Arizona law, had been the foundation of everything that followed. Without Jennifer Kowalski's meticulous record-keeping, Patricia might have gotten away with it. Without my saved credit card statements and flight confirmations, I might not have been able to prove my alibi. Without Derek's careful evidence documentation, the case might have been harder to prosecute. Small acts of diligence, combined with persistence and faith in the legal system, had defeated what seemed like an impossible situation. That was the real story, more than the drama of arrests and trials. The real story was that ordinary people, armed with truth and unwilling to surrender to fraud, could fight institutional corruption and win. As I prepared for bed that night, I checked my email one last time and found a message from the new HOA president, asking if I would serve on a committee to develop best practices for other Arizona HOAs to prevent fraud. Apparently, our experience had attracted attention from the statewide HOA Management Association, and they wanted to create educational materials based on what had happened in Saguaro Heights. I agreed immediately. If sharing my experience could help even one other homeowner avoid what I had gone through, the time investment would be worthwhile. The committee work would take hours, but it felt important, a way to transform personal trauma into community benefit. That had been Patricia's fundamental miscalculation. She had assumed people would accept fraud rather than fight it. She had counted on apathy, fear, and the intimidating weight of official documentation to protect her crimes. She never anticipated that someone would dig deeper, verify records, and persist through months of investigation and legal proceedings. Her promise of justice, implicit in every forged document and fake agreement, had been fulfilled in ways she never intended. Real justice had come not from her manufactured paperwork, but from the patient work of police detectives, prosecutors, defense attorneys ensuring fair process, judges applying the law, and ordinary citizens willing to testify to the truth. I turned off the lights and lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of my house settling in the night. Tomorrow would bring new work projects, weekend plans, the ongoing maintenance of house and life. The extraordinary crisis had passed, leaving behind lessons and memories but allowing ordinary life to reclaim its rightful place. Patricia Henderson had forged my signature, but she couldn't forge truth. She had created fake notary records, but she couldn't erase real ones. She had demanded money through fraud, but she couldn't prevent justice from demanding accountability in return. In the end, her elaborate schemes had been defeated by something as simple as a notary's journal and a homeowner who refused to be robbed. That was the story I would tell, in committee meetings and casual conversations, whenever someone asked what happened with my HOA. Not a tale of heroism or drama, but a reminder that documentation matters, evidence triumphs over authority, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to accept lies as truth and fight back with facts. She had promised justice through her forged documents and official seals. Instead, she got justice delivered through prison bars and criminal convictions. And I got my home, my peace, and proof that the system could work when good people refused to surrender to fraud. That was enough. That was everything.